Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Protests continuing across the country and flooding social media. The hashtag Blackout Tuesday now trending. This after the president vows to deploy large number of troops if unrest continues and cities and states cannot contain it. Again, taking to social media and Twitter himself to describe Americans as hoodlums and thieves, lowlifes and losers. New York City now has a curfew in effect starting at 8 p.m. tonight for the next week. This as the city is poised to reopen after months of lockdown in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and curfews will go into effect across the country as darkness falls. Meantime, the markets ending the day up, somehow disconnected from all of this chaos. I want to bring in our Bloomberg Markets reporter, Abigail Doolittle, who's been following all of this. Abigail, on top of this, U.S.-China tensions flaring up. Why do investors seem unconcerned?
It really remains puzzling, especially at this point, Emily, with the degree of the unrest here in the U.S. It's almost offensive in a way that you have stocks climbing higher. At the end of today, stocks climbing and ending at session highs, almost a giddy feeling to the session. So the fact that you have that kind of trading action happening while we have this situation in the U.S. and those U.S.-China tensions, it really doesn't seem to make sense. But again, it tells you that investors are looking past these unfortunate, sad, surreal events toward the U.S. corporate profit outlook and making the assessment that it's unlikely to affect the economy on a longer-term basis. We also have something else going on beyond the weak dollar, and that certainly has been helping out stocks. But we've had a move over the last few weeks into cyclical stocks. Those are recovery stocks out of the stay-at-home stocks. So up top there, we have the NASDAQ 100 and the FANG index, both up about 0.5%. But take a look at Expedia and United Airlines as an example of recovery stocks. Both of those stocks are up more than 1.5%. So that's adding a little bit of a bullish feeling to this market, even though it doesn't make sense relative to what's happening here in the U.S. with this, again, very sad and tragic unrest. Relative to the U.S.-China relations, Emily, it's even just as puzzling, because if we take a look at an index of China firms listed here in the U.S., that index is up for a third day in a row, up 8%. The S&P 500 itself is up over the last 3 days, up about 2%. So again, investors just looking past all these fundamentals. One way of putting it, although it feels a little bit trite in the current environment, is climbing the wall of worry. But that does seem to be happening at this point, Emily.
Meantime, Abigail, watching a few stocks here. Zoom shares up after hours after the company reported its quarterly results. Of course, it's been thus far an essential for so many people in the middle of this pandemic. What do the numbers tell us?
They put up a very strong quarter, and there was a little bit of pressure, I would say, skepticism around this quarter, price to perfection going into this quarter. Emily, if you can believe it, the stock was up 200%, but the stock climbing after hours. They beat sales in a huge way. They beat sales by 170%, putting up nearly $330 million. So the surge based on at home, everybody Zooming to have conferences, teleconferences of sorts, really helping. But the bigger question is, would they be able to boost their guidance? And not only did they boost it, Emily, they boosted by almost double. They're talking about $1.8 billion in the fiscal year, up from an estimate of $950 million. So Zoom, price to perfection, but they're delivering. So the shares are being rewarded at this point.
All right, Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle, thanks so much for watching the moves for us. I want to turn now to Facebook, exploding in the middle of another controversy. This over Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg's decision to leave up a post from President Trump unflagged that suggests that looters be shot. Zuckerberg just concluded a meeting with Facebook employees. I'm hearing a lot of angry questions today, but Zuckerberg pretty much defending his stance that he doesn't believe that Facebook should be, quote unquote, an arbiter of truth, and leaving the post up unchanged. I want to bring in Bloomberg contributing editor David Kirkpatrick, who of course wrote the book on Facebook. David, what's your take on Zuckerberg's decision here, simply doubling down?
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, doubling down seems to be the right way to describe it. It's a rare example you can find when Zuckerberg has done anything that Donald Trump doesn't like in the recent past, which is ironic considering that Trump continues to pressure Facebook to do even more, and the general view on the right is that social media is unfavorable to the right. But it's hard not to believe that Zuckerberg has concluded that the cost to him of crossing Donald Trump is greater than what would be the value of acceding to the wishes of so many of his employees and so many people in the public to really apply some kind of standard of basic decency of rhetoric on the service.
It's interesting that you would draw a direct line there from Trump to Zuckerberg. Of course, we know that the president called Mark Zuckerberg on Friday. Supposedly, Zuckerberg told the president that he was disappointed in the tone and putting Facebook in a difficult position. Meantime, you've got Facebook employees walking out this week in the first, to my knowledge, public display of protest among employees at Facebook. You've got a couple of Facebook employees resigning today, publicly resigning because of this decision. Owen Anderson, a Facebook employee, tweeting today, "I'm proud to announce that as of the end of today, I am no longer a Facebook employee." Another employee, Timothy Avaney, posting on Facebook, "I cannot stand by Facebook's continued refusal to act on the president's bigoted messages aimed at radicalizing the American public." For a company that is so used to public scrutiny, and we've seen Mark Zuckerberg stand his ground in the midst of public scrutiny, I wonder if internal scrutiny by the company's own employees could have more of an impact on him and potentially getting him to moderate his stance.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Emily. The thing that Zuckerberg depends on the most is talented engineers. Seeing public resignations today is a historic first. Although to some extent, when Chris Cox resigned a year and a half or so ago, who was Zuckerberg's top deputy, there was a little bit of an aroma of public protest in that action too. But this is historic, the degree to which Facebook's employees are collectively organizing to disagree with and protest the company's behavior. If Facebook can't get good engineers, it can't continue with what really matters to Zuckerberg, which is growing and providing a service to everyone on the planet. But ultimately, I think Zuckerberg is playing politics with a lot of his so-called principled decisions about speech. I simply don't believe that he's following principle. I think he is much more political than he is willing to admit.
Well, interesting on that point, Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, held a nearly hour-long call with civil rights leaders who came away pretty disappointed, again, about this decision. Color of Change President Rashad Robinson telling Bloomberg, "The problem with my ongoing conversations with Mark is that I feel like I spend a lot of time and my colleagues spend a lot of time explaining to him why these things are a problem, and I think he very much just lacks the ability to understand it." Not saying that he doesn't understand, but that he actually lacks the ability to understand it. What's your take on that?
My take on that is it's pretty disturbing. I'm not sure I would look at it quite that way, although in their public statement, the civil rights leaders said he did not demonstrate understanding of historic or modern-day voter suppression. You'd think that Nick Clegg, who is his head of communications and used to be the deputy prime minister in the UK, would be giving him some guidance here. I'm afraid that Zuckerberg doesn't, this is ironic, but I think he takes advice about as well as Donald Trump does. And if he doesn't know something, he doesn't acknowledge that he doesn't know it. And we're sort of reaping the harvest of that. But I want to just make one other point about this company. For all of my criticisms of it, and they are really serious, we can't deny that it's playing a very historically important role in this time of protest, and that is meaningful. And so, and in Zuckerberg's own mind, that's probably the kind of rationalization he makes, that he believes his service is providing a critical capability for the human race in the United States and elsewhere, and that any of these minor problems like being criticized over the speech of the president is relatively insignificant compared to his ability to continue spreading this incredible tool to everyone. And even though I think he overdoes that point of view, today we are seeing these demonstrators might not be able to accomplish what they're doing without social media and Facebook in particular, and Instagram.
And obviously, such an interesting position that Facebook is taking vis-a-vis Twitter. David, we could talk about this for hours. Thanks so much for calling in. I'm sure we'll be back with you on this story as it progresses. David Kirkpatrick, our Bloomberg contributing editor. All right, coming up, we're going to speak to a CEO who just severed a relationship with Facebook over this very decision. We're going to speak with Talkspace CEO Oren Frank, who ended a deal with the social network, coming up later in the show. Also next, are we in for another night of protests and possibly looting across the United States? We're going to speak to a prominent civil rights voice from Philadelphia, where presidential candidate Joe Biden just weighed in. This is Bloomberg. Curfews going into effect across the country tonight as protests and potentially looting continues. Curfew will start at 8:30 p.m. in Philadelphia, which has seen a considerable amount of damage and was also the site of presidential candidate Joe Biden today.
We have to be vigilant about the violence that's being done by this incumbent president to our economy and to the pursuit of justice.
For a sense of what's happening in Philadelphia, I want to bring in Charles Ellison, who is the host and executive producer of Reality Check, a daily public affairs program on WRD in Philadelphia, and a contributing editor at TheRoot.com, who's been a voice of Black America for some time. Charles, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, we've seen some really disturbing videos coming out of Philadelphia, specifically protesters being gassed.
Right.
Talk to us about your sense of the situation right now, especially given these continuing strong words from the president.
Yeah, it's a confluence of very volatile events that are happening right now on several different tracks. One of the situations is very tense still in Philly. People bracing for another evening of unrest. And then there are a lot of complaints. A lot of folks, particularly, you hear a lot of black leaders in various communities around Philly who are talking about people infiltrating peaceful protests. So, people who are really not there about the issue of police violence or about structural racism are there to sort of aggravate the situation and make it more violent and setting up peaceful black protesters. I've heard from a lot of black elected officials in Philly who are fed up with that and kind of also telling many people in their community, particularly young people, hey, just be careful while you're out there peacefully protesting or perhaps consider staying home. And so you're seeing a lot of that. I was talking to the mayor of Philadelphia, Jim Kenney, who was also saying that, hey, listen, I'm with this movement, I'm with this moment, but I have a responsibility and obligation as mayor to keep the city safe. So if I feel like residents are in danger, if I feel like my police are in danger, and he was kind of defending the decision to use tear gas. You've all seen very vivid pictures of protesters in Philly on that expressway in Center City being tear gassed. He defended that. He said, hey, there was a volatile, violent situation that sparked off. And, I felt like, hey, drivers were in danger, police were in danger, average bystanders, people were in danger. So we had to make that decision. It was a tough call.
Meantime, you've got the primary voting happening in the state today. Right. You've got Joe Biden saying earlier that President Trump has turned his own country into a battlefield, is fanning the flames of hate.
Right.
You've got the president on Twitter calling Americans lowlives and losers, hoodlums and thieves.
Yeah.
How are we even in this state, in this country at this moment?
Exactly. It's very surreal, very bizarre. A very striking contrast between the current president, Trump, who's just very unpresidential in this moment, is just way out of his depth and not even willing to rise to the occasion and just lead. Very striking contrast between him and then Biden, Joe Biden, giving this speech in Philadelphia, which is that's the place where there was the official spark, the official trigger of rebellion, of American rebellion against monarchy. Joe Biden's giving a speech there in Philadelphia. That's the backdrop. the birthplace of democracy. And so people see Joe Biden acting very presidential. That's the kind of leadership that they want in a chaotic, uncertain moment like this. So interesting thing about, just turnout numbers for this primary. Pennsylvania is a key battleground state, of course. Philadelphia is the golden nugget in the corner of that state in southeastern PA. So, you want to watch turnout numbers today because it's a dress rehearsal. It's a fire drill for the big game in November. And actually, we're seeing bigger than anticipated turnout numbers in this primary. The primary turnout numbers in Philly, based on some initial data, show that it's about to surpass the 2012 primary. So that's very interesting because there was an expectation that voter turnout would be abysmally low because people are afraid of going out. You've got so much unrest. But I'm hearing reports also from Washington, D.C. and the nation's capital. They have a primary. Maryland has a primary. There's big turnout at these consolidated polling locations in a sense that people understand the vote-by-mail rhythm. They get it. They're anxious. They want a fix to the crisis that's happening in this country. And so they're getting prepared for that big moment come November.
All right. Charles, I do want to get your thoughts on the role of technology in all of this. Of course, on one hand, you've got social media, which is in so many ways the engine, the motivation for what we're seeing today. You've got Mark Zuckerberg taking a stand, leaving up potentially what's considered violent speech by the president. Meantime, if you look in every feed, it's pictures, it's images, it's videos, and I wonder if social media is motivating here, or if on the other hand it can make us somewhat numb to all of the dangers, given that we are so overloaded with it.
It's a mixture of both. So, this is an unprecedented time in U.S. history because it's the first time where we've had this sense of massive social unrest or social upheaval with all of these media mechanisms and channels and tools at our disposal, right? Like right there at our fingertips. So it's like the first moment in U.S. history where we've had like a multimedia collage of social upheaval, of social unrest. And there's some good aspects to that because then, we have all this communication going on. We're able to see images of police violence and to hold certain leaders, to hold certain institutions accountable. But there's also some very bad and troubling aspects to it in terms of the spread of misinformation and the saturation of so much noise and static. People are leaders, elected leaders especially, institutions are going to have to learn how to manage this moment. And people like Mark Zuckerberg are going to have to learn that too. He's extremely tone deaf. I mean, I personally had deleted my Facebook page after the 2016 election. And I think that's probably the only way he's going to listen is, from civil rights leaders and various folks within the black political and advocacy community. They're going to have to start staging a mass movement to delete their Facebook pages if they really want him to listen and understand what's going on here.
Well, that's certainly one position. Charles Ellison, veteran political strategist, so appreciate you sharing your views with us here on the show today, and stay safe out there. Coming up, we're going to be talking with a CEO who just terminated a business relationship with Facebook. We'll speak to Oren of Talkspace, the CEO of Talkspace. Oren Frank, next. This tweet from Talkspace CEO Oren Frank earlier. We at Talkspace discontinued our partnership discussions with Facebook today. We will not support a platform that incites violence, racism, and lives. Black Lives Matter. Talkspace CEO Oren Frank with me now. So this deal, Oren, involved providing therapy free of charge to people who need it, and obviously Facebook is a huge platform. What compelled you to do this?
I think, first of all, thanks for having Emily, and good to be here. I think it's a very basic question of making the right choice and of a moral imperative. As a CEO of a mental health company, I know for a fact that social media in general is harmful for our mental health. I know that Facebook and other platforms know that. And in this time when Black Americans are being killed on the streets and the levels of agitation and incitement to violence and hate and lies are so high, the decision of Facebook to say, we do not take responsibility, we're not going to curate, we're not going to fact check, amounts to saying we are willing to harm our users. It's as simple as that. And that is not about ideology or politics or anything else. It is about right and wrong and basic human decency. And we could not live up and stand up with working with this. If they ever change their policies, which sorry, go ahead.
I'm sure, Oren, it was a carefully considered decision. You've said this will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we are in a mental health crisis in this country. I mean, give us a state of Americans' minds right now as, we've gone through this health crisis, an economic crisis, and now a devastating social crisis.
That's exactly right. We've seen a huge surge in pain, in depression, in anxiety, in relationship issues, in relationship abuse, horrible things that have been driven by COVID. And with this recent, I would say, uprising, you see another jump. Now, instead of containing that, if you actually flame the fire, and it doesn't matter whether you're the president or you are the CEO of the biggest media platform in the world, aka Facebook, you're achieving the very same result, which is hurting people, and I think that's exactly what we see. And the last time we saw such a surge or a similar surge, far smaller actually, in mental health issues was actually right after the election in 2016.
All right. Oren, just talk to us a little bit about, and quickly, we have 30 seconds, what kind of leadership you'd expect to see from other companies right now. I mean, there are a lot of companies that have business dealings with Facebook.
So I think it's an individual and a corporate thing because those two have merged recently. The size of the world around us, everything is okay except for everything. We should act according to what we believe is right. Put the money consideration aside. Right. It is important, and just do it. Don't talk about it. Do something about it.
All right. Talkspace CEO Oren Frank, you did something about it. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your position. Coming up, we're going to be talking about Amazon rerouting deliveries to avoid clashes with protesters. That's coming up after this quick break. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. As protests continue to rock cities across the country, Amazon has been modifying its delivery routes to avoid clashes with protesters and maintain employee safety. Meantime, sales of pepper spray have been soaring on Amazon itself. Joining us to discuss the moves Amazon has been making, Wedbush Security's Dan Ives. Dan, it's so interesting to see how these protests are impacting the world's biggest tech companies. Pepper spray actually shot to the top of the bestseller ranks for sports and outdoor items, and you've got users now talking about the demonstrations and reviews. One review of pepper spray saying, put the cops down when they mess with you. What do you make of all of this?
Look, I mean, Amazon finds themselves in the middle of a firestorm because on one hand, from a delivery perspective, it's about the safety of the drivers. But yet at the same point, they got to make sure the packages get there. But you're seeing rerouting across the board. And when you talk about the pepper spray comment, I think it just shows that a lot of these tech companies, that they find themselves in an uncomfortable situation relative to this backdrop, which is unprecedented. And I think that's something Bezos and Amazon are trying to navigate, I think, by the hour.
Meantime, you've got Amazon saying they're going to offer some new family benefits through Care.com to their 650,000 full and part-time employees, in part because of the pandemic, giving every one of them 10 days of subsidized emergency backup, child or adult care. What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, this is also coming at Amazon with a bit of a black eye coming out of the warehouse situation. And I think when you look at other companies, Microsoft among them, in terms of trying to adjust for this new environment, I mean, daycare and making sure that employees have the opportunity where their children are being taken care of. And it's something where I think Amazon and a lot of other tech companies are adjusting on the fly to the new normal because employees cannot go back to work. Remember, it's 650,000 employees, many of them. And Amazon's, if not one of the leading companies in the world. So they follow by leadership. And I think you're seeing not just Amazon, but you look at Apple, Microsoft, Google, among others, their stances and their moves over the coming days, weeks, months are going to be pivotal in terms of perception, both internally as well as externally. And I think that this was a good move, especially the massive challenges that employees are faced, especially if they have to go to the office.
Let's talk about Facebook, because Facebook was getting such high praise for being, the last to go back to work. Zuckerberg out there speaking about working from home, and suddenly this post from President Trump became such a flashpoint. You've got civil rights leaders upset. You've got Facebook employees walking out and resigning. Mark Zuckerberg did a Q&A with Facebook employees today, and there were lots of angry questions. How big a risk is this to a company that depends on good talent?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the Dorsey Twitter battle versus Trump, it really put Facebook in the eye of the storm. And ultimately, Zuckerberg took the other side of the coin in terms of how to handle this issue. And, of course, extremely controversial within Facebook as well as externally. And I think this is going to be a storm that Zuckerberg and Facebook need to navigate, because what makes Facebook who they are. It's the engineers that goes up and down the elevator every day. And keeping employees happy, but yet keeping their stance. And it's something, were they going to soften their stance? It seems they're not. And I think it just comes down to right now, Zuckerberg and Facebook, especially coming out of Cambridge Analytica and everything they dealt with there, I think they're trying to stay away from this tsunami that Twitter is dealing with. And I think they will continue to potentially change their stance, especially as internally this continues to get more and more pushback in a very sensitive time.
Right. Talk about a tsunami. I mean, Facebook has now its own tsunami in the inaction of this. And I wonder, Twitter is, of course, such a smaller company, but a huge megaphone for the president. And I wonder how this positions the two of these companies, on sort of opposite sides of the line, and what that actually means for the business.
Well, and especially going into a presidential election. But I think it also, you take a step back, the reason Zuckerberg and Sheryl and Facebook have taken the stance, it comes down to the R word, it's regulation. And I think that's the broader worry, in terms of the impact of the business model. When you look down the road from an advertising, from a content perspective, and this is something all big tech's facing. And I think right now you see investors not worried about this, right, shrugging it off, because it all comes down to what the regulatory environment looks like, especially going into what looks like, more of a bonfire situation as we go into late summer, fall for all of big tech. And I think that's why Zuckerberg and Facebook tried to take the opposite stance of Dorsey, which, no doubt is going to be extremely controversial, both internally as well as externally. But if you look at the stock, how investors are viewing it, they are shrugging it off, at least for now, as it appears to be contained in terms of business model changes.
Okay, let's talk quickly about smartphone sales. Gartner put out a report that smartphone sales bound to decline 20% this year. Obviously, this impacts so many companies. Gartner saying Huawei was hit the worst, but of course, wondering what this means for Apple, for Samsung. Where do you stand?
Yeah, it goes back to, in a backdrop of a once-in-a-100-year pandemic, most consumers are focused on their jobs, health, and even toilet paper over the course rather than a smartphone. So you have some dark days ahead in terms of the smartphone in the near term, but that's also why the 5G cycle and iPhone 12 going into later this year into next year is what we view as the seminal moment, ultimately the catalyst. I do think on the other side of this dark valley, you will see a significant rebound in the likes of Apple, Samsung, and even a lot of the Chinese competitors, just given this 5G super cycle. Although right now, as consumers coming out of this dark storm, $1,000 iPhone or smartphone looks a lot more expensive than it did pre-COVID. And that's something that's going to be a headwind for smartphone as well as the tech food chain as we navigate this storm and get to the other side of the dark valley.
All right, Dan Ives, Wedbush Securities. Always good to have your perspective here on the show. Thanks so much. Coming up, President Trump escalating the global fight over taxing American technology companies. The move now heightening chances another global trade dispute could result in retaliatory taxes on the U.S. Details on that next. This is Bloomberg. The Trump administration is opening several investigations into the digital tax plans being considered by several different U.S. trading partners from Europe to India. Joining us now, our Bloomberg tax reporter, Laura Daverson, who covers corporate tax for Bloomberg. It's a complicated series of investigations, Laura, so talk to us about what exactly the White House is doing here.
So to go back several months, all these companies have been announcing these new digital taxes that would that really target Amazon, Google, Facebook. These countries are looking at a way to sort of tax these American companies that they don't get a slice of the pie on. So fast forward to now, we've really seen heightened tensions between the U.S. and these countries. And the U.S. says, look, if you are going to tax our companies, if you go forward with these taxes, we are going to find a way to tax some of your products. We saw this play out a little bit several months ago with France. France and the U.S. sort of tentatively made a truce, but really what we could see here is a whole new slew of tariffs, or at least threats of tariffs, on a wide range of products from everywhere from India to EU, Turkey. It's a big group of countries rather.
So then what could that mean in terms of retaliation potentially from these countries?
So we could see retaliatory tariffs as well coming in this way. We could end up sort of in a proxy trade tariff war over this digital tax issue. So there is sort of an international group that is working towards some sort of agreement that kind of every country could get a little slice of that tax revenue. Talks have been going on for about a year, and they hope to have a deal by the end of this year. But it's a very ambitious timeline, and particularly with the coronavirus that has stalled a lot of the in-person meetings that the finance ministers would have, it's even trickier for them to meet that deadline in about 6 months.
Meantime, you've got countries still hoping to reach a global deal by the end of the year, but so much happening globally, a pandemic and economic crisis now in the U.S., this social crisis. What's the likelihood we'll actually see a deal on this in time?
Skepticism is reigning heavily right now on this. At first there was hope that there could be a deal. Now it's seeming that there's almost certainly not going to be one, or at least not kind of a big deal wrapped up in time. So the question and the concern really is for a lot of the triggers for these tariffs. Spain, or these taxes. Spain, for example, they said if there's no global deal by the end of 2020, we're going to implement our digital tax on Google and Facebook. There's been some agreement from countries to extend these deadlines, but there will come a point, and countries are growing impatient, saying that the OECD, which is the international group that's organizing this, is drawing out the negotiations. And as we know, countries are really looking for sources of tax revenue. So this would be a very easy thing for countries to kick in and be able to coffer their budgets.
All right, Bloomberg's Laura Daverson, I know you'll continue to cover this story for us. Thank you so much for that update. Meantime, as the coronavirus has disrupted so many things, one of them, of course, is colleges and higher education. The nation's leading educators are now weighing the possibility and the responsibility of ensuring student health and safety and combating discrimination and injustice. Earlier, Harvard University President Larry Bacow spoke exclusively with Carlisle's David Rubenstein on Leadership Live. Take a listen.
A lot depends upon, where the country is in the fall, where the country is both in terms of the coronavirus and how people feel comfortable gathering and getting together, because that will determine, in fact, how many students we have on campus, but also where the country is, I think, emotionally, how it deals with the challenges that it confronts right now as we deal with some difficult issues, which, we've been dealing with for generations, but seem to have become a flashpoint in the last several weeks.
So when students are doing things online, do they say to you, well, this isn't the experience I signed up for, so can I pay a little bit less tuition, or do they not say that?
Well, some students say that. I think I would tell you that the online experience worked better than I think most of us expected it to. Far from perfect. Faculty members only had 10 days to plan for it. So it was a very quick pivot. We've got people working now to develop courses that would be taught online in the fall from scratch if we have to be online in part in the fall.
Well, let's talk about the fall. A lot of universities are trying to figure out what to do. Notre Dame has announced that they're coming back with all their students, I guess, and some other universities. I think in your city, Boston University is coming back as well. Is it Boston?
Well, BU has, in fact, BU announced a hybrid form. They'll have some students on campus, some off campus. We'll all have some students on campus. The mix may be different by different institutions.
So if those, is it different between undergraduates and graduates? In other words, graduate students tend to live off campus and maybe they have their own apartments. What is the problem with undergraduates? Is it housing or bathrooms or athletics or what?
So there are a number of issues. We actually have more options when we control our own housing stock, which we do for undergraduates, which means that we could bring them back almost any time we want. They don't have to find housing in the marketplace as graduate students do. The graduate student housing stock, as you observe, most of them are living in apartments, most 1 to a bedroom. So if they got sick, they could easily self-isolate in ways that are difficult or harder for undergraduates, where there may be a couple people sharing a room. One of the other difficulties with undergraduates has to do with, candidly, the way they live and what they expect to experience when they come to a college campus. We are looking at making sure that we can ensure proper social distancing with undergraduates when they're here, that they'll wear, proper masks and other things. It's not just the housing. We also have to think about how we teach students. So we will need to de-densify classrooms. So that will mean that we, in a class that normally might have 90 students in it, let's say, you could only probably put 30 students in the same classroom at a time and maintain social distancing. Students have to enter and exit the classroom carefully so that they don't bunch up. You have to disinfect the classroom probably after each use. So classrooms will be the availability of classrooms will be a challenge for many institutions.
And students who come back, will they have to wear masks, or how will you police their social distancing techniques?
Well, I suspect when we bring students back, everybody will be masked on campus. We are working through a number of protocols right now for how we would manage that. Lots of things will be different when students come back. I don't expect students to be gathering in large numbers in the dining halls. They'll be scheduled in terms of when they can eat so that we spread them out.
What about athletics? It's hard not to have contact with a lot of athletic.
I think it's highly likely that certain sports won't be played this fall.
David Rubenstein there with Harvard President Larry Bacow. All right, coming up, U.S.-China tensions continuing to escalate and the dispute seeming to get harder to solve. We will discuss next. This is Bloomberg. Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam has blasted President Trump's handling of protests across the country, claiming the president has double standards. Of course, the president has condemned Beijing's, what he says, curbing of essential freedoms in Hong Kong as protests across the U.S. continue to rage, and the president has suggested that looters be shot. Joining us now to discuss, Diana Fu, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Toronto. Professor Fu, curious at what Beijing's view on all of this is, especially this discussion that is now raging across Chinese state-run media about President Trump's double standards.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle because Trump's threats to American protesters basically gave Beijing the best propaganda gift ever. Because Beijing is now saying, look, when the Hong Kong police cracks down on protesters, Washington calls it human rights abuse. They call the Hong Kong protesters heroes. But when the U.S. tear gases and shoots rubber bullets on their own protesters, they call it restoring order. So for Beijing, this is absolutely U.S. hypocrisy on full display. And I think that to some extent it's true that Trump's actions definitely is hurting U.S. credibility, but I think it's also giving Beijing a golden opportunity to basically change the conversation. Now, Beijing wants people to focus on police brutality, but that's not really the crux of the issue in Hong Kong. The heart of the issue in Hong Kong is the right to self-govern. Under the one country, two systems arrangement, Hong Kong people should be the ones deciding their laws and not Beijing. So what Beijing is doing is it's bypassing Hong Kong altogether and passing the national security law, and that's effectively moving the status quo towards a one country, one system with Beijing in the driver's seat. And I think, Emily, that is exactly why Hong Kong people are so anxious about their future.
Meantime, you've got President Trump in an election year, and his actions on China, even his threats, are very mobilizing to his base. So I wonder if that could motivate the actions that the president ultimately takes on China. I mean, of course, he's threatened a number of things, though the Phase 1 trade deal remains largely intact. How could potentially facing re-election impact what the White House decides in terms of policy here?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. But, I think if Beijing has learned anything in the past years, it's that Trump is very unreliable and he changes his tune all the time. So I think they're waiting to see if Trump's threats of retaliation are really going to come true or not. But even if Trump keeps his word and imposes tariffs and trade restrictions and visa requirements on Hong Kong, I very much doubt that Beijing would actually backtrack. I think for Beijing to change its course after it has passed a law through the National People's Congress, this would be seen as a national humiliation. It would be seen as bowing to foreign bullying, and Beijing will not show such kind of weakness.
Meantime, do you expect Beijing to retaliate even further? I mean, they've asked state-run companies to not buy U.S. farm products. What more could they do?
Yeah, I think Beijing has adopted a very combative diplomatic posture, and this is what some people have called a wolf warrior diplomacy. And so the wolf warrior is a character actually from a Chinese blockbuster who defends China's honor. So Chinese diplomats are hitting back hard at any country that Beijing sees as attacking China, and this includes the U.S., EU, Canada, Australia, and other Western allies. So I think that there is very much a possibility that Beijing will retaliate.
Meantime, what does this all mean for Hong Kong? I mean, the part of the issue is Hong Kong's ability to self-govern, and is that ultimately taken away?
Yeah, I think that this security law is really a watershed moment for Hong Kongers. It's very bad news for Hong Kongers who care about civil and political liberties, because Beijing is essentially declaring that it will define which activities consist of subversion, which activities are secessionist or seditionist, and not the Hong Kong people. And this law, very worryingly, would also allow mainland security agencies to set up in Hong Kong. And so Beijing does not deal very lightly with individuals who are charged with subversion. In mainland China, activists who are charged with subversion are often given long jail sentences. So this is also very worrying for Hong Kong protesters who could potentially be charged with subversion of state power.
All right, Diana Fu, what is your view on the next step? What are you going to be watching?
Well, I mean, I think the next steps, it's hard to say what the next steps are, but I think that unfortunately the options for those who oppose the security law in Hong Kong are very few. It's basically a fight or flight situation. So one option for those who oppose the law is to fight to the end. And indeed, we've seen that many have already taken to the streets once again. But they are being met with very well-prepared security forces in Hong Kong. And just last week, authorities arrested more than 300 of activists. So activists are fearing, protest fatigue. This is amplified by the pandemic, and they're not seeing the same turnout as last summer. Now, others could also choose to flee.
Okay.
So in the coming months, we might see people fleeing.
All right, Diana Fu, University of Toronto Associate Professor, really appreciate your insights there. Thank you so much for stopping by. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Bloomberg Daybreak Australia is next. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.